Excuse me. My name is Tristan. I'm a principal engineer with Eventbrite. In my view, letting the best ideas win should be a central tenet of every organization's philosophy, whether it's explicitly stated in the company's values or not. For me, it means being deliberate about expectations of people's behavior and company norms that elevate ideas only on the basis of the quality of those ideas and not on the identity of the person who perhaps proposes it or the egos and personalities of those who are decision makers. I myself, as a technical leader, try to remain conscious at all times that I am always promoting the best idea and not necessarily my own. So this talk is really about my story of when I got promoted from a staff engineer, or lead engineer as we called it, to a principal engineer, and how absurdly I found myself in a situation where I was no longer surfacing the great ideas because my own influence had become, or by my own words, seemed to have much more weight to them than I expected them to. I found myself in a situation where coming up with great ideas was more complex and not less. So, my experience as a staff engineer looks a little bit like this. So I'm the guy on the left. If you believe me, I used to have more hair. So I would often contribute ideas or come up with ideas myself. And I really, really valued the process, formal or otherwise, of getting feedback on those ideas. So I'd either come up with a tech design or talk to my fellow engineers, and then they would give me an error signal, effectively, that I would then incorporate to then refine my idea. Until eventually what sort of comes out of this process is arguably a great idea. Then, one day, the clicker stopped working. Then, one day, I was promoted. Generally, I think this was a good thing. At least that was my opinion. It meant a bit more pay, and it felt like validation of the last couple of years of work that I'd been doing. But it came with a rather interesting sting in the tail. Suddenly, the feedback loop looked a little bit like this. I was still contributing ideas or to other people's ideas and coming up with my own ideas, but the quality and the quantity of the critical feedback I was receiving seemed much less. I don't really have a theory of mind as to why this was the case. The company I worked for at the time has a really open culture. It's a lovely place to work. People are encouraged to challenge each other. Indeed, challenge and commit is stated as one of the company's values. And yet, simply by being promoted to principal software engineer, it was as if my words had more weight. Now, this was a bit of a crisis for me, because it certainly wasn't as if suddenly the error rate of my ideation had dropped to zero, simply by virtue of having been ordained as a principal engineer. So the only possible consequence here was that, in general, the quality of the ideas that came out of this feedback loop process was lower than it was before. On a personal level, this started to interact in weird and wonderful ways with my imposter syndrome, but I certainly won't be covering that in this talk. So, what am I going to do about this situation? Well, I decided I had to be really more deliberate about my ideation and not leave it to, automated feedback loops. And so I came up with 4 rules to increase the quality of the ideas that I was involved with generating, and that's what I want to share with you now. Rule 1 is, can I help someone else decide? And this isn't really about sort of shirking responsibility for my own decisions, more recognizing that an idea to which I might be contributing isn't something that I need to make a decision about. It could be that I'm chatting with a staff engineer or a senior engineer who is making a decision about something that's entirely contained within the scope of their own team. It might be helpful for me to pair with that person, or to maybe offer some coaching or mentoring, but ultimately it's their decision, and I should be helping them make the best decision they can. Rule 2, this is my favorite rule, and I think it's my favorite because it's the one I find most difficult to do, and therefore tends to be on my mind the most often. So the scenario here is that you have a technical problem to solve, and you've decided that the best way to come up with a solution is to gather your engineers together in a meeting and talk about that solution. Trouble is, of course, sort of between finding out about the problem and having that meeting, you've had some thoughts on the subject, particularly if it's overnight and you've had a shower, because we know all the best ideas happen in the shower. So you come to the meeting, you present the problem to your fellow engineers, and then you're met with confused stares. And the temptation is incredibly strong. It's like a force of nature. It's to just jump in with your own idea. Well, this is what I think. What do you guys think? And as well-intentioned as that can be, it's ultimately destructive to the idea of surfacing the best idea. There are two reasons for this. One is because your words, having been promoted to the level of a principal engineer or above, naturally seem to hold more weight. So people will switch off from coming up with their own ideas and will just latch on to your own. The second reason, and perhaps more damaging, is the fact that the assumptions that you don't even realize you've made in coming up with your own assumption are insidiously injected into the minds of the engineers that you're talking to. A better approach would be to maybe catch 30 seconds yesterday with the engineers that you're going to meet with, to at least tell them the problem or put it in the body of the meeting request so they can also be having those thoughts in the shower about how to solve the problem. When you come to the meeting, hopefully there isn't a pregnant pause with blank stares, but even if there is, ride it out. It's awkward, but if you really, really want people to make their own assumptions and come up with their own ideas. Rule 3, democratize decision-making. So I can't really take credit for this. A fellow principal engineer in my previous company sort of had this idea, and I thought it was so good I'd take it for my own. And they do say that plagiarism is the best form of flattery. And as to set up a kind of a Jedi council of engineers that are within the teams that you have influence over, large enough that it's representative across the teams, and small enough that it can actually make decisions without getting bogged down in too much conversation. The benefit here is you start to then get familiarity with a core set of engineers who will not be backwards in coming forwards in terms of giving you feedback on your own ideas. Added value with this is you can get those engineers to bring their own problems and their own solutions. So that acts to multiply your effectiveness in a principal engineer in generating solutions to problems and even identifying problems you hadn't realized existed. However, whilst you can delegate some of the work of this decision-making, you can't really delegate the accountability or the responsibility for it. So be Yoda, take charge of the group. If it means you want to buy a cloak and a lightsaber, then, carry on. So far, I've really talked about how you interact with the engineers within the teams that you have influence over as a principal engineer. And I think someone else said this in a recent talk, and that is use your community. So if you're in a larger company, you are probably in a community of other principal and senior principal engineers. So it's really important to leverage that. And they're really not shy. If you present your ideas to them, you'll get some really good feedback about what's lacking. And even if they're a completely different speciality to you, and that's certainly my problem as a native mobile engineer, all my fellow principals tend to be back-end oriented. It gives them a different focus to look at your problem, and often you can get some really insightful feedback that allow you to see your problem from a different perspective. So in summary then, 4 rules for a happier life as a principal engineer and surfacing the best ideas. Can I help someone else decide? Is it even my problem to solve? Maybe I could just help them. Embrace the awkward silence in the room when you're having an ideation session. Democratize decision-making, be Yoda. Use your community. So thank you very much for listening. My contact details are there. If you've got this, will probably be on the screen for a few seconds just as I leave. So if you want to get in contact, that's my LinkedIn details. I'm really, really looking forward to speaking with some of you afterwards in the, I forgot what it's called, the Q&A session. Thank you very much.